Hi, kids, moms, and dads. So glad that you've taken a few minutes to listen to children's story time. The name of our story today is A Dark Night in the Garden, and it's the story about Jesus when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane before his crucifixion and his resurrection. Let's see what the writer has to say. A Dark Night in the Garden. It can be found in the Bible in John 18. The wind was picking up now, blowing clouds across the moon, shrouding the garden in darkness. Stay up with me, Jesus asked his friends. And they said yes, and they waited under the olive tree, but they were tired, and they soon fell asleep. Jesus walked ahead alone into the dark. He needed to talk to his heavenly Father. He knew it was time for him to die. They had planned it long, long ago, he and his Father. Jesus was going to take the punishment for all the wrong things anybody had ever done or anybody would ever do. Papa, Father, Jesus cried, and he fell to the ground. Is there any other way to get your children back, to heal their hearts, to get rid of the poison? But Jesus knew there was no other way. All the poison of sin was going to have to go into his own heart. God was going to pour into Jesus' heart all the sadness and the brokenness of people's hearts. He was going to pour into Jesus' body all the sickness in people's bodies. God was going to have to blame his son for everything that had gone wrong in the world, and it would crush Jesus. You see that? Jesus was praying to his Father. The disciples were fast asleep. Have you ever been so tired you couldn't stay awake? Let's go on. It says, but there was something else, something even more horrible. When the people ran away from God, they lost God, and it was what happens when people run away from God. Not being close to God was like a punishment for Jesus, and he was going to have to take that punishment. Jesus knew what that meant. He was going to lose his Father, and that, Jesus knew, would break his heart in two. Violent sobs shook Jesus' whole body, and then Jesus was quiet like a lamb. I trust you, Papa, he said. Whatever you say, I will do. See the picture? Jesus is in the garden. He's laying on the ground praying. Suddenly, through the trees, a glittering of starlight flashed off of steel. Into the quiet garden came whispers, muffled voices, clanking of metal, and the sound of boots marching. Jesus stood up and he woke up his friends. He said, now is the time, he said gently. Everything that was written about me, what God has been telling his people all through the long years, it is all coming true. And into the night, with the burning torches and lanterns, with swords and clubs and armor, they came, an army of soldiers. Judas, he led them straight to Jesus so that they could arrest him. Jesus was waiting for them. See here the picture? They were about to arrest Jesus, and we know that Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss. Peter leaped up, took a sword, tried to defend Jesus. He actually sliced off a guard's ear, but Jesus immediately touched the guard's ear and healed him. Peter, he said, this is not the way. Peter didn't realize that no army, no matter how big, could ever arrest Jesus, not unless Jesus let them. Then Jesus, who had never done anything except love people, he was arrested as if he was a criminal. Jesus' friends were now afraid, so they ran away and they hid in the dark shadows. The guards marched Jesus off and they took him to the leaders. The leaders put Jesus on trial. Are you the Son of God? They asked. I am, Jesus said. Who do you think you are to call yourself God? You must die for calling yourself the Son of God. Only the Romans were allowed to kill prisoners. So the leaders, they made a plan. We'll tell the Romans this man wants to be the king, and then they will crucify him. But it would be all right. It was God's plan. It was for this reason that I was born into the world, Jesus said. See there, the pictures? Jesus said this, for this reason I was born into the world, and it was to take your sin and mine. The next story that we want to look at is the sun stopped shining. We have to kind of put these two together because they're so much related. You see Jesus, he's got the cross and all the soldiers. He's been tried and he's been told that they were going to crucify him. The sun stopped shining is the name of our story. So you're a king, are you? The Roman soldiers jeered. Then you'll need a crown and a robe. They gave Jesus a crown made out of thorns and put a purple robe on him and pretended to bow down to him. Your Majesty, they said. Then they whipped him. They spit on him. They didn't understand that this was the Prince of Life, the King of heaven and earth, who had actually come to rescue even them. The soldiers made him a sign, our King, and they nailed it to a wooden cross. They walked up a hill outside the city, and Jesus carried the cross on his back. Jesus had never done anything wrong, but they were going to kill him the way criminals were killed. They nailed Jesus to the cross. Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. You say you've come to rescue us, people shouted, but you can't even rescue yourself, they told Jesus. You say you've come to rescue us, people shouted, but you can't even rescue yourself, once again. But they were wrong. Jesus could have rescued himself. A legion of angels would have flown to his side if he had just but called them. If you were really the Son of God, you could just climb down off of that cross. They mocked him. And of course, they were right. Jesus could have just climbed down. Actually, he could have just said a word and made it all stop. Like when he had healed the little girl and he stilled the storm and he fed the 5,000. But Jesus didn't. He stayed on that cross. You see, they didn't understand. It wasn't the nails that kept Jesus there. It was love. Papa, Jesus cried, frantically searching the sky. Papa, where are you? Don't leave me. And for the first time in his life, and the last, when he spoke, nothing happened. Just a horrible, endless silence. God didn't answer. He turned away from his son. Tears rolled down Jesus' face, the face of the one who would wipe away every tear from every eye. See the picture of Jesus on the cross? He went through a lot for your sin and mine, didn't he? Even though it was midday, a dreadful darkness covered the face of the world. The sun could not shine, and the earth trembled and quaked. The great mountains shook. Rocks split in two until it seemed that the whole world would break, that creation itself would tear apart. The full force of the storm of God's fierce anger at sin was coming down on his own son. Instead of his people, it was the only way that God could destroy sin and not destroy his children whose hearts were filled with sin. Then Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "It is finished." And it was. He had done it. Jesus had rescued the whole world. You and me he rescued. Isn't that awesome? Father, Jesus cried, I give you my life. And with a great sigh, he let himself die. Strange clouds filled the sky, purple and orange and black like a bruise. See the picture with the crosses? We know the Bible says that he was crucified with two other men. Jesus' friends gently carried Jesus after he had died, and they laid him in a new tomb carved out of a rock. How could Jesus die? What had gone so wrong? What did it mean? They didn't know anything more, except they did know that their hearts were breaking. That's the end of Jesus, the leaders said. But just to be sure, they sent strong soldiers to guard the tomb. They hauled a huge stone in front of the door of the tomb so that no one could get in or get out. See the soldiers putting the stone in front of the tomb? They were going to guard it. And then the next story we want to look at in this series is called God's Wonderful Surprise. See the women going to the tomb the next morning? God's wonderful surprise. Jesus' friends were sad. They would never see their best friend again. How could this happen? Wasn't Jesus the rescuer? The King God had promised. And it wasn't supposed to end like this. Yes, but whoever said anything about the end? Just before the sunrise on the third day, God sent an earthquake and an angel from heaven. When the guards saw the angel, they fell down with fright, and the angel rolled the huge stone away, and he sat upon top of it and waited. At the first glimmer of dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other women headed to the tomb to wash Jesus' body. The early morning sun slanted through the ancient olive trees, drops of dew glittering on the leaves and the grass, little tears everywhere. The friends walked quietly along the hilly path, through the olive groves until they reached the tomb where Jesus was. And immediately they noticed something was odd. It was wide open. They peered through the opening into the dark tomb. But wait, Jesus' body, where was it? It was gone. And something else, a shining man was sitting there with clothes made from lightning. Don't be scared, the angel said, but they couldn't help it. They screamed anyway. The angel asked them, "What are you doing here? This tomb and the tombs are for the dead people." And the women couldn't speak. "Jesus isn't dead anymore," he said. "He's alive again." And their hearts leaped. And then the angel laughed with such gladness, and they felt for a moment as if it had woken from a nightmare. See the angel? What had happened? They went to see Jesus, and he was gone. The other women rushed home, but Mary stayed behind. How could it be true? Jesus, he was definitely dead. How could he be alive? Just then, Mary heard someone else in the garden. Perhaps it's the gardener, she thought. He'll know where Jesus' body is. I don't know where Jesus is, Mary said to who she thought was the gardener. She said, I can't find him. But it was all right. Jesus knew where she was, and he had found her. Jesus said, Mary. Only one person said her name like that. She could hear her heart thumping, and she turned around, and she could just make a figure out. She shaded her eyes to see and thought she was dreaming. But she wasn't dreaming. She was seeing. She was seeing Jesus. Mary fell to the ground, and suddenly tears filled her eyes, and great sobs shook her whole body. And all she wanted in that moment was to cling to Jesus and never let him go. You'll be able to hold on to me later, Mary, Jesus said gently, and always be close to me. But now go and tell the others that I am alive. You see that? Jesus says, go tell my disciples that I am alive. Mary ran and ran all the way to the city. She had never run so fast so far in all her life. She felt she could have run forever. She didn't even feel like her feet touched the ground. The sun seemed to be dancing and gleaming and bouncing across the sky, racing with her and shining brighter than she could ever remember in the clear, fresh air. And it seemed to her that morning, as she ran, almost as if the whole world had been made brand new again. It was almost as if the world was singing for joy, the trees and the tiny sounds and the grass and the birds in her heart. Was God really making everything sad come untrue? He was making even death come untrue. She couldn't wait to tell Jesus' friends. They wouldn't believe it, she laughed. She was right, of course. See Mary, she's running to tell everybody that Jesus was alive. She was so happy. She was so happy, and she went to tell her friends that Jesus had risen from the dead, just like he said he would. And remember that he took your sin and my sin, and he took it and put it under him. So we don't have to pay the penalty for that. He's prepared for us a place in heaven. I hope that you've asked Jesus into your heart to be able to come into his family. God bless. Have a great week.